Hello, good morning. I'm Ashok Kurokode, consultant rhinologist and anterior surgeon from Winchester and University Hospital, Southampton, UK. I welcome colleagues from around the world on behalf of organizing team to the second day of inaugural Winter Global Rhinology and Skull Base Surgery Webathon. Global Rhinology Network is a non-profit organization with a mission to foster surgical education in rhinology and skull base surgery. We have successfully hosted annual multi-center live surgical webcast, The Lioness, since 2014 in collaboration with Lion Foundation. Thousands of surgeons from all corners of the world have benefited from it. More than 2,000 surgeons from 110 countries have registered for GRACE 2020. We had hugely informative and engaging 15 sessions on endoscopic sinus surgery presented by eminent rhinologists and skull base surgeons on day one. We'll be having similar sessions today focused on anterior skull base surgery. This event is hosted at the Global Telemedicine Studio of Professor Wilco Grollman in Utrecht, the Netherlands. It is supported by Medtronic and Karl Storz.
So can I invite again Christos Yaugalas? Christos this morning gave a very excellent talk on pituitary and cavernous sinus lesions. So for those who have joined recently, Christos is a professor of ENT, so he's with a specialist practice in rhinology, skull-based surgery in Hagia Hospital in Athens. And without further ado, I'll invite him to host Dr. Satish Jain. Dr. Satish Jain is going to give a keynote on nasopharyngeal angiofibroma. So to you, Christos. So you can start introducing Satish and then we start.
Hello. Again, it's my pleasure to be here. Fantastic work. It's a marathon, but it's very well planned. And indeed, I have the pleasure now of introducing Dr. Satish Jain, who has the biggest private surgery center in India and has done tens of thousands of operations, both from what I understand in endoscopic sinus surgery as well as in otological surgery. And his last experience, I think he's very happily willing to share with us with his lecture on the nasopharyngeal carcinoma. So the floor is to you. Thanks very much.
You need to unmute Dr. Satish. Unmute your mic.
Thank you, Dr. Christos, for the introduction. And before I begin, I would extend my thanks and regards to Dr. Ashok Kurokade for giving this opportunity to share my small experience with this August gathering. Thank you so much, Dr. Kurokade, for giving this opportunity once again. So, coming to the topic given to me on something to speak about nasopharyngeal angiofibroma. We all know juvenile nasopharyngeal angiofibroma is a big challenge to the clinicians for many regions, and the biggest of them is the bleeding. We all know this is a benign tumor of the nasopharynx. Though it is benign, yet it is locally invasive. The thing which scares the surgeon is the vascularity of the tumor, and it typically occurs in young adolescent males. These are 5 characteristic features of these tumors, and since bleeding is a concern, the reason is very obvious. The tumor itself is composed of vascular tissues, vascular channels with intermittent fibrous stroma, and the vessels are just endothelium lined. They're not having a thick elastic or the muscular layers to contract to control the bleeding. That is the reason they give uncontrollable hemorrhage, and that's what the concern to the surgeons. So in this talk, this talk will feature on certain issues about decision making on juvenile nasopharyngeal angiofibroma. There are lots of myths and controversies in the management of this tumor. So the first big challenge is reaching to a correct diagnosis, the appropriate radiological workup, the need for the embolization to reduce the vascularity. This is one of the most commonly practiced thing across the world. We'll discuss the pros and cons of that. Whether to go by the open approach, the traditional one, and now the new endoscopic approach for last a decade or more, which is more and more popular now for the regions which we'll discuss. Recurrence, the so-called recurrence, this is a benign tumor, yet it can recur, but that recurrence, the so-called recurrence, is actually a residual tumor which can regrow. So the strategy to prevent the recurrences and a need in certain cases of radiation therapy will be a focus of the discussion today. So this tumor, as far as coming to the diagnosis, this tumor exclusively occurs in the young adolescent males. So like any young adolescent male presenting with nasal obstruction, history of bleeding, you put your endoscope and see a mass in the nasopharynx, it cannot be anything else than angiofibroma to your mind. It occurs immediately in your mind as juvenile nasopharyngeal angiofibroma. That is how clinically we diagnose it, and we refrain from biopsying such lesions for the sake of preventing hemorrhage, because this is vascular lesion and we don't want that kind of hemorrhage from biopsy. So the diagnosis is again, confirmed by means of radiological findings. And this tumor has a characteristic radiological appearance, characteristic pattern of spread by means of you can pick up on the radiology. The tumor arises in the region of the pterygoid wedge here, and then it circumferentially grows to certain preferential areas like nasopharynx, pterygoid process, laterally, anterolaterally goes to the pterygomaxillary fissure into the infratemporal fossa, posterolaterally through the pterygoid process goes to the parapharyngeal space. Superiorly, it can go to the inferior orbital fissure to the orbit, and then superiorly, posteriorly, it can go on from the orbit to the cavernous sinus, to the temporal lobe, and so on. That's how it creates more and more problems. So that's how it is diagnosed on radiology with certain characteristic findings. So the question comes that what radiological investigation need to be ordered to begin with. So by and large, the first radiological investigation to be ordered or should be ordered is a contrast enhanced CT scan, which gives you a by and large picture of the enhancing tumor with certain characteristic preferential path of spread to diagnose as a JNA. Our philosophy is to not only the contrast CT scan, our philosophy now is to order a CT angiogram, which not only gives you the benefit of the contrast CT scan, the information which you get from the contrast CT scan. More than that, it gives you information about the vascularity of the tumor. That is most important. The vascularity information you get out of the CT angiogram is very, very important in decision making. I hope my CT angiogram is being shared on the screen now. May I know? Can you see my CT angiogram
Yes.
shared on this?
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Yeah. So when we order a CT angiogram, what we recommend clinicians to look at the CT angiogram yourself, because we don't only need the information of what vessels supplying to the tumor. More than that, we want the information that how the vessel is entering into the tumor, how many other vessels are going to the tumor. We all know most commonly as a tumor, once it starts growing, it gets exclusively its blood supply from the internal maxillary artery. But as tumor goes to the other areas, it acquires more and blood supply from the other thing. Like in the parapharyngeal space, once it grows, it acquires additionally from the ascending pharyngeal artery. It goes to the skull base. It acquires more and more vascularity from the internal carotid circulation. And that is a decision-making thing. For surgeons, we should know what are the vessels supplying to the tumor. Not only that, how the vessels are entering into the tumor, so that you can take a call whether you can control that vessel beforehand, before you handle the tumor, so that you can handle it endoscopically or not, or that we have to go for the open approach. So this is one of the decision-making factor. And here, what I'm going to show you is how to read the CT angiogram for this particular purpose. In a very, very simple manner, I can go quickly, and then we'll go into details of this. See, this is the common carotid artery in the neck, dividing into the external and internal carotid artery. As we go up, see my cursor. These are a lot of branches arising from the external carotid artery. The facial artery, superior, the lingual artery, the ascending pharyngeal artery, and then this this external carotid artery goes behind the angle of the mandible. See this? And divides finally into two terminal branches. See here, two terminal branches. This one is the internal maxillary and this one is the ascending, the superficial temporal. So this internal maxillary is of concern as far as JNA is concerned. See now, look at this in a dynamic fashion. I am following this vessel, internal maxillary, internal maxillary. This is the tumor in the infratemporal fossa, nasopharynx, nasal cavity. This is the pterygopalatine fossa, and this is my vessel. And see how this tumor and this vessel related to the vessel goes in the anterior part of the pterygopalatine fossa, being pushed anteriorly by the tumor itself, and go in the anterior part of the pterygopalatine fossa to supply this tumor. That is behind the posterior wall of the maxillary sinus, and that is an added advantage once you consider endoscopic approach, because in such lateral extension or approach is the endoscopic dankers. It's not that the medial part of the tumor which you can handle, you know, endonasally. The concern is the lateral most part of the tumor with full exposure and taking the vessel into control. What simply you can do? See this. This is the lateral part, lateral most corridor part of the tumor here. What we see, we need to remove this medial wall of the maxilla and part of the anterolateral part to have a head-on exposure to the most lateral part of the tumor. Sometimes there is more lateral extension. You don't need to go far laterally in the linear fashion. You can mobilize the tumor in your field. But this is by and large the kind of exposure, head-on exposure you need to the lateral part of the tumor by the endoscopic dankers. And this you can simply achieve by this approach. What we want to know from this endoscopy, CT angiogram, how the vessel is entering into the tumor. Many a times we have seen the branches of the vessel or vessel itself enter the tumor from behind and remain behind the tumor, particularly in revision and other situations, difficult situation, complex tumors, and then you have to think twice to take up the endoscopic approach before, because then to catch the vessel, to take the vessel in control endoscopically, you have to go through the tumor, and that is counterproductive. Our approach to the endoscopic surgery, which I'm going to discuss later on, is based on taking the vessel into control first before entering into the tumor, because the moment you enter into the tumor, it will show what it is. It is so vascular, you can't control endoscopically the field, the surgical field, and then you can't manage the situation under vision. So the principle is to catch the principal vessel first. Many of the cases we are doing without embolization, which I'm going to share with you the reasons behind that, in what cases we embolize, what we don't. And in majority of the cases when we don't embolize, based on this fact that how the vessel enters into the tumor, we take a call whether we can tackle it endoscopically or not. So this is one of the most important factor. And this dynamic CT angiogram, which you can see on your console, see this, what I was saying, you can see 3D. This is my vessel which is entering into the tumor. See, this is the vessel, and if I want to see this vessel in all planes, I can see here how the vessel is, you know, see this is the vessel here. Let me remove, yeah, this is the vessel here, and see how this vessel, at what point of time, at what level it enters into the tumor. This is how it enters into the tumor. So when you open the posterior wall of the maxilla to enter into the pterygopalatine fossa, actually in this coronal plane, when you see, you can have a fairly good idea at what level in the pterygopalatine fossa, what height of the pterygopalatine fossa, what anterior-posterior level, by means of three-dimensional dynamic CT angiogram, you can have a fairly good idea where exactly you are going to find the vessel. Like for example, in this patient, the vessel is here. When you open up the pterygopalatine fossa, you can get to know the height. See this, let me again take this. See, this is the level of the hard palate, and I can see this vessel is roughly 1.5 plus centimeter above the level of the hard palate. So you can have a fairly good idea where to look for the vessel rather than blindly looking for the vessel and ultimately damaging it. So this is the beauty of the dynamic CT angiogram, that you get the complete information about the tumor, the extension, the same information which you get from a contrast CT scan, but more than that, additionally you get to know what vessels are entering into the tumor. Like in this particular patient, see this is the ascending pharyngeal artery arising. This is the ascending pharyngeal artery arising, and this one of the branch is entering into the tumor from behind. See, there's small branches entering into tumor, but this kind of small branches entering into it, you can handle rather than handling a big branch. Though this branch is behind the tumor, so you can expect some sort of bleeding when you deliver the nasopharyngeal part. So that you have to be prepared. It makes you prepare that how much bleeding approximately you're going to have, and if you really need, you really expect more bleeding, you can arrange more blood, and you can plan your way according to your experience. So this is one information. Second information about the diagnosis. You know, for diagnosis, what we believe, the MRI sometimes helps you a lot. MRI is one investigation which helps you like, you know, anything. Let me show you this, one of the CT angiogram and the MRI. This patient, see, this is, I told you, this is one of the most decision-making investigation. In MRI, one of the sequence, so like such tumors we get, many a times we get such tumor occupying the entire nasal cavity, nasopharynx, when the JNAs grow like anything. And you really do not know whether it is a GNA or not, because you can't take a biopsy once you suspect a GNA. And MRI certainly helps you in this regard. And one of the most important sequence of the MRI, that is called diffusion weighted MRI, is a bioimaging. Bioimaging in the sense, diffusion weighted MRI calculates the you know, water molecule movement in the magnetic field. MRI is a magnetic field. So in those lesions who have a high water content will have less diffusion. Those tumors who have a less water content, more cellular, more nuclear cytoplasmic ratio, will have more diffusion restriction, and those are considered to be malignant or more likely to be malignant. Here, such tumors with no diffusion restrictions are 100% something you can rule out a malignancy in these. We have seen couple of patients referred to us with a nasopharyngeal mass in the child, assuming a JNA for surgery, and when we investigated with the MRI, found huge diffusion restriction and turned out to be malignancy rather than a JNA. So you can avoid such misdiagnosis by means of, you know, doing a MRI in those situations. Like for example, this tumor, this is a different situation. Just to give you a fairly good idea about the diffusion weighted MRI. See this patient. See this patient who had a this tumor. Yeah, this was the tumor. See, this was a malignant tumor. Why I'm saying malignant tumor? Look at the diffusion restriction. This rules out any benignity of the tumor, rules out JNA, rules out any other benign tumor. And this is one of the most important sequence pre-operatively when you are not supposed to take a biopsy to confirm or to rule out a malignancy. So this is second point in the diagnosis, which is sometimes very, very important. Third point in the diagnosis is the need for an open approach, or you know, you to take a call between the open approach and an endoscopic approach. Our philosophy to take a call between open and the endoscopic approach depends upon a lot upon the CT angiogram, number one, and number two, the extent of the tumor, and number three, the vascularity coming from the intracranial circulation. See, once you're removing any tumor endoscopically, if the tumor is getting additional vascularity from the intracranial ICA or part of the intracranial circulation, if you try to avoid such tumor from below, it can lead to retraction of the vessel from above and can bleed intracranially and can be a disaster. So that is one factor. Second factor is the extension of the tumor. See, in endoscopy, in our series, majority of the cases we do endoscopy, except some example which I'm going to show you, some situations. In endoscopic is not a contraindication for a big lesion. I tell you, any big lesion can be removed endoscopically, provided you need a space to maneuver your endoscope, provided you don't have a vascularity coming from the intracranial circulation. Look at this example. This particular patient had a huge tumor. Let me show you how big the tumor is. Now, if you want to take it endoscopically, you can, but see, look at the size of the tumor. Look at the, not only size, where will you maneuver your instrument? Where will you maneuver your telescope, instrument, the visualization? See, to begin with, the moment you put your endoscope in the nasal cavity is all tumor. You can't maneuver, and the principle in such tumors, because of the vascularity, the principle is to not to go into the tumor before taking the vascularity in control. Whatever embolization, whatever you have done, you are not supposed to go into the tumor directly to create hemorrhage, to give hemorrhage, and to make the situation worse. So in such situation, see such a huge tumor where you don't have a space to even put your endoscope, these are tumors, I would say, are relatively where the endoscopy is contraindicated, to make your life so difficult, to make your surgical course more longer. Even if you do heroics, you try to manage it endoscopically, try to segmentalize it, it is going to take so long. Overall bleeding is going to be so long, and such young children, see this 12-year young with so much of surgical time, with so much of blood loss, is something you need to think twice before taking such a call. And second indication for endoscopy, see this particular tumor, it looks so good to remove by endoscopic approach. We have removed many such tumors by endoscopic approach which has extended to the intracranial space. This tumor has a tendency not to invade dura in the beginning. So majority of these tumors are extradural. Now the challenge comes if the tumor acquires the blood supply from the one of the intracranial vessels, which I'm coming to, this is opening, I'm going to show you. See this huge tumor vessels. Huge tumor vessel, this is another, relative contraindication, because such tumor vessels are difficult to call. Even with the whatever good embolization you do, the embolization reaching to the microvasculature level is so difficult in such. This is like every fistula within tumor, which is most difficult. Now the interesting finding in this particular case, even such case we can take up endoscopically. What stopped us from taking endoscopic is, see this tumor which has gone intracranial to the middle cranial fossa, the region number 1, see this vessel, where this vessel is coming from, the middle cerebral circulation. If you have, see this vessel coming to the tumor, coming from the middle cerebral circulation, and if you happen to remove this tumor from below, avulging this vessel would be a disaster. Second, see this vessel. This vessel is a branch from the MCA. This vessel is a branch from the MCA coming directly to the tumor. See inside the tumor. Such huge branches from the MCA coming to the tumor, to me, is a direct contraindication for an open approach. And in such cases, we add on the subtemporal approach to have a good exposure from below and up. You can remove the upper part of the tumor first, devascularize from the MCA branches, and push it down, and you can remove whatever you can, play your game from below. Then you are pretty safe to do that, rather than playing everything from below, and that sometimes can be a disaster. So this is one of the most decision making, a point when you take this call by means of diagnosis, by means of the CT angiogram. This is another interesting example. We were all set, looking at the MRI of the patient, we were all set to deliver this patient endoscopically. See this is the tumor. This is the tumor. This is a huge lateral extension, which is no way any contraindication to endoscopy. We segmentalize and remove in parts, and this is the internal maxillary branches. Now, as you go behind, this tumor was going to the orbital apex, and then laterally, this is the dura. This tumor was completely extradural. It looks like, so simple to deliver endoscopically. As far as the contraindications are concerned, looking like no contraindication in this particular situation. When we got a CT angiogram, the situation completely changed altogether. Now look at the CT angiogram of this particular patient. See, this is so important. You can avoid a big disaster by all these means. Now coming to the CT angiogram in this particular patient, if I reconstruct to the coronal one, see this coronal CT angiogram. Now this is the vessel. This vessel, see this, the main MCA is giving a huge branch to the tumor from above. If I try to bring it down from below, it can be a disaster. See the ICA giving huge branch to the tumor. This to me is an absolute contraindication for any endoscopic approach. If you try to do, this is something I would say a disaster, and for patient it is never safe. So our philosophy is to get a CT angiogram, see how the vessels entering into the tumor to take a call whether it can be taken by open or endoscopic approach, whether there is a need for embolization. If suppose the tumor is limited where the vessels are coming from behind, we would take a call of embolization rather than going to the tumor and catch the vessel. Then another indication for open approach. Look at this patient. This was one of the most massive JNAs we have removed, and the simple regions, the decision making was not difficult in this particular patient. For the regions I tell you, this is arterial. Yeah. So this particular patient, look at the tumor. This was tracheostomies. Tracheostomies, and see, just a minute. Yes. See, this is tracheostomies, and this was the tumor. This was the tumor, and see how it is coming from the nose, nasopharynx, right to the facial soft tissues across the mandible and eyeball, skull base, intracranial space, and see the vessels, the branches of the carotid, the huge carotid-like branches passing, many such branches passing to the tumor. Let me take this MVP protocol to show you vessels much better. MIP sequences. Yes. Now see this tumor with a huge facial extension. We followed each and every vessel going to this, and this tumor had a huge vascularity from the superficial temporal artery, which you anyway can't control by an endoscopy. This kind of a mass lesion you can't control endoscopically for it. See the carotid artery, carotid and carotid-like branches passing through the tumor. Many such branches passing, huge branches coming from the internal carotid passing to the tumor is a certain contraindication. And the carotid since was 360 degrees submerged. We did open approach. We did DSA before. We sacrificed the main vessel preoperatively by means of coiling, as the cross flow was good, and could be able to remove the tumor completely by a maxillary swing and the subtemporal approach. So you have to take a call, and there are certain open approaches we need to know in our practice so that we can take a call in those given situations. It's not that always that the endoscopy is the approach of choice. Open approaches do have their place in those conditions. We need to identify those indications in certain situations. So the workup is very important. As I mentioned about the angiograms, the need of MRI, the vascularity, see the diagnosis. You can actually see the vessel, how the level of the vessel when you take the internal maxillary in control. And this is the MRI angiogram. I can skip this. So coming to the bleeding aspect, what all you can do to manage the bleeding. See, as I said, there are many sources of bleeding to this tumor. This is a pure vascular tumor. The bleeding can come through the external carotid system, sometimes bilateral, and the principal vessel is the internal maxillary. And as the tumor grows further to the parapharyngeal space, to the roof of the infratemporal fossa and other areas, it can acquire some other vessels like coming from the ascending pharyngeal and the middle laryngeal. It can have, as you have seen, the branches from the internal carotid system as the tumor, invades the skull base deeply, and of course the venous bleeding, particularly from the pterygoid plexus and the cavernous and the other venous system area. So there are three sources of bleeding: external carotid, internal carotid, and venous bleeding. Now, what does the embolization do? There are the list of maneuvers to reduce the bleeding overall during surgery. Embolization is the principal one which is being practiced across the world. Maybe pre-operatively, intraoperative embolization. There are so many, methods to embolize nowadays. The newer techniques to embolize. Nowadays we have tried in few patients, besides coil embolization, particle embolization, glue embolization, and now we have tried in a couple of patients the onyx embolization. The cost is a limiting factor, but truly, if you ask me, the best of the embolization situation what you get from is the onyx. Is a liquid material, very, very safe, can't enter the dangerous osmosis to the internal carotid system, pretty safe, and it can reach to the microvasculature of the tumor. If you embolize with the coils, you don't reach to the microvasculature level. Particles may not reach to the depth, and if you try to use smaller particle, then the chances of, through the dangerous osmosis to the internal carotid system are high. So there are limitations for so many things. But onyx is really good. The cost is a limiting factor. Along with that, the control hypotensive anesthesia coagulation we use, which I'm going to show in one of our few of our videos. Then other techniques you all know, flow seal surgery. There's so many things you can use intraoperatively to control the bleeding. So, like these are the techniques of embolization. I'm not going into the details, but there are certain advantages why people are practicing. The reason is one and only the reduction in the overall blood loss. You can maintain your visualization, reduce the need of transfusion more and more, and you can take care of surgically inaccessible arterial feeding vessels by completely embolization. This is one of the biggest advantages, I would say, besides the bleeding control. So overall operating time is reduced, your visualization is reduced, and you're more confident in removing such tumors, larger tumors, rather than having without embolization. But it is not all free of complications. There are certain concerns also with the embolization. Availability of the good embolization facility, the expert embolization team, the cost, sometimes the cost exceeds the cost of the surgery, particularly in a country like India, where cost is a big factor for poor patients. The risk of thromboembolism because of the dangerous osmosis, you have to be careful. The intervention radiologist should be very, very experienced. The effectiveness is, as I mentioned about the embolization reaching to the microvasculature level, which is very, very important. More than that, this has been studied through, I have gone through certain publications where people have studied the tumor margins. Without embolizing, when you go without embolization, your tumor is seen distinctly from your surrounding areas as compared to the embolized time where your tumor margins are difficult. They get collapsed, and sometimes this tumor, which has a tendency to, enter into the narrow crevices and canal from the pterygopalatine fossa to here and there, and the tumor, collapsed tumor, can be sometimes difficult to identify, and you leave behind the part of the tumor, which is the major cause for the so-called recurrence. So overall, it has been, published, the recurrences are overall high in the embolized patients as compared to the non-embolized. So the embolization is something not free of problems. And what you achieve by the embolization, you don't actually embolize the internal carotid system bleeding. If you have a vessels coming from the internal carotid system to the tumor, you practically don't embolize, and you have to face that bleeding. You have to prepare yourself with extra blood and other maneuvers to reduce that overall bleeding. Venous bleeding, you can't do anything by means of embolization. What you all achieve with the embolization is the bleeding from the external carotid system. And in those situations, the majority of the time, it is the internal maxillary, which is the principal vessel. And once internal maxillary is the principal vessel and you have a CT angiogram, how it is entering to the tumor, what we do intraoperatively, rather than a pre-operative embolization without wasting time, energy, and money into that, we go intraoperatively, go to the vessel first rather than a tumor by means of straightforward dankers. The vessel comes from lateral, catch the vessel first, intraoperatively devascularize the tumor, and then remove it like any other tumor, rather than embolizing all patients. And we take the call of embolization upon based upon the various vessels coming to the tumor. Like such large tumor, which has a vessel coming from the ascending pharyngeal branch, which has a vessel coming from the middle maxillary, and those vessels, this is internal maxillary, which you can of course catch before handling the tumor, but these two vessels coming from behind you can't catch, and these are the ideal candidates for embolization, because to catch these vessels, you have to go through the tumor, which is impractical, that is not possible. And these are the ideal candidates for embolization, rather than, indiscriminately embolizing every patient. That is something, a change in the surgical technique, which we have been following and propagating. So this slide is about the categorization for the junior colleagues, whether they can handle these tumors according to their facility, their expertise. Tumors which invade the skull base, tumors which do not invade the skull base. This is how you can categorize them into various categories according to your competence to remove that tumor. That is something different thing to discuss here. Now, coming to the endoscopy in the open up, we have already discussed during the CT angiogram part which patients which they don't do endoscopic. Majority of the patients we do endoscopy for the advantage, for the certain advantages. Not that the endoscopy is avoiding a scar is a big advantage. Any tumor or any procedure, if I am doing with the open approach with certain distinct advantage, I'll opt for that rather than endoscopy. So one has to have a advantage for opting for the endoscopy rather than simply avoiding a scar. And here, you all know the illumination, the kind of illumination endoscopy gives. On-site magnification and illumination is the major advantage of the endoscopic system. This tumor has a tendency, as I said, to spread through the various fissures and canals and the hidden corners, which you can see through the endoscope much better with the wide angle endoscope. And secondly, the most important thing for the so-called recurrences, the tumor has a tendency to invade the eversion system of the pterygoid and the sphenoid bone, which you can drill very well under endoscopic guidance, which cannot be achieved at that level by any open approach. That is the major advantage why we go with the endoscopy, not for simply avoiding a scar. But still, in the patient safety point of view, we take a call of open approach in certain indications which I have already mentioned. Few words about the recurrences. The recurrences have many reasons, and the biggest one is the inadequate assessment and the planning. This is something I mentioned, and that's why I mentioned in beginning in detail about the dynamic CT angiogram, which gives you a lot of information about the tumor extension, vascularity, the various vessels, how they enter into the tumor. So that assessment and planning is the key. A fault in the assessment and planning can lead to a overall, failure. Marrow infiltration is one of the biggest reasons, particularly pterygoid and the sphenoid bone, that you need to completely drill away. If you happen to leave a smallest portion of the tumor, it can regrow to a bigger size. And those recurrences are, believe me, much more difficult to handle than the primary tumors. Then tumors having significant ICA blood supply, which you are handling, are more difficult to clear up completely, more difficult to ensure a complete clearance, and then the recurrence is imminent. Significant intraoperative bleeding is one of the factors where you can't identify about the tumor clearance 100%, and that is one of the source of recurrence. And surgical expertise, whatever, is very important. Whether you go by the endoscopic or open approach, one must be well versed with all this. And particularly for the endoscopic surgeon, I would say, even in this endoscopic era, endoscopy is the advantage. We must be well versed with certain open approaches in our practice in certain given situation, like maxillary swing, subtemporal, sometimes the lateral anatomy, and one of the midfacial degloving, and all these approaches one must be well versed in certain given situation. So these are the indications for the open approaches, particularly in the revision situations with encasement of the major vessels, particularly carotid arteries. This is the contraindication for any endoscopic approach, as you cannot handle the internal carotid laceration as effectively as compared to the open approach, and that is something contraindicated in many of our patients having complete encasement of the carotid. As I mentioned, we got the DSA done with a good cross flow. We got the carotid artery coiled from a few millimeter or centimeter proximal and distal to the involved segment, and remove the tumor from the carotid completely. That gives you an opportunity without lacerating the vessel, and so that is one of the way. Otherwise, in majority of the encasement situation, we go by the open approach. And if you have to, it is imminent to give a laceration, then it is better to avoid that and leave those particular patients most difficult situation for the post-operative radiation. Radiation is never a treatment of choice, but it is reserved for only those patients where the surgery can be more, something endangers the life. This is now one of the surgical strategy about removing the division of the tumor. See, in the present context, we have been able to remove more and more bigger tumors by endoscopy, and that strategy is possible by means of division of the tumor. See this patient has a huge infratemporal fossa cheek extension. What we need to do is, you can't deliver this tumor as a whole. What we do, take the vessel in control first, divide the tumor at the lateral end of the nasal cavity or the medial end of the maxilla, deliver the medial part first through the oral cavity, acquire some more space to bring in the lateral part and deliver it separately. So sometimes this segmentalization of the tumor is an important, strategy to remove the bigger tumor. Sometimes we segmentalize into 3, 4, 5, 6. In a bigger tumor, we have done even 12 segments of the tumor to deliver such tumors. So before I, finish it, I would like to take you a couple of minutes. I know our session is already running behind the schedule. Quickly, I will take you some of the important, the surgical steps. So this is the endoscopic picture, unedited. I will quickly run this. Our tool of choice is the coblation. This is a ProSize Max coblation vent. It is like 1 in 3, 3-in-1 tool. See this this irrigation all the time, coagulation, cutting, everything is available with a suction attached to it. So what we do first for the dankers, just this coagulate the lateral wall of the nose, the turbinate, everything to minimize the bleeding, and then you can ablate, remove this.
Sorry to interrupt you. We are not able to see the video.
You're not able to see. Oh, now?
Yes, we can now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So let me go back. This is the tumor. First, we do the surface coagulation to reduce the surface vascularity. The majority of the vascularity of the tumor, the prominent one, is on the surface. More and more center part is getting necrose on the surface of the more and more vessel, and it helps in reducing the size of the tumor. Then coagulation is used to, coagulate the lateral wall mucoperiosteum. You can remove this. This is the level of the pyriform aperture. This is the anterolateral wall here on this side, and this is the medial wall of the maxilla. And in dankers or modified dankers, our role is, this is the medial wall of the maxilla. Entire mucoperiosteum being removed, completely removed, and now this anterolateral wall is being removed. And see, this is how the head-on entry into the maxillary sinus being made. You can do it by means of a micro drill. See, this is the head-on entry into the maxillary sinus. You can go ahead with a chisel and hammer quickly. Micro drill is more, precise, more sophisticated, and coagulation is always, all the times helps you, having a good visualization. The only thing which comes in between is the nasolacrimal system, which we always advocate. Flushing it, cut it flush with the orbital floor, so it doesn't hang any more down to get fibrosis. And this is how, see this, the nasolacrimal duct being cut. Flush with the floor of the orbit, it doesn't come in your way. And see, this is the nasolacrimal system. This is how you can prevent the post-operative epiphora. This is your maxillary sinus. See, this is the nasolacrimal duct. This is maxillary sinus behind the posterior wall, in front of you. And now I go quickly behind. This is the posterior wall of the maxilla. See the brilliant illumination, magnification. Now the posterior wall of the maxilla being removed. This, because of the tumor pressure behind, many a times it's thinned out on its own because of the tumor. You remove the posterior wall. This is the mucoperiosteum of the pterygopalatine fossa. That's the mucoperiosteum of the pterygopalatine fossa. And as I had shown in the CT angiogram, the tumor itself pushes the vessel anteriorly. The moment you open up the mucoperiosteum, this periosteum of the pterygopalatine fossa, The first structure are the vessels, the vascular network. The neural network is far behind, and see, with the cobbletter you can easily find the vessel. This is the vessel here. We always knew by means of a CT angiogram the level of the vessel where you are going to find, and this is the major vessel. And in this tumor particularly, these vessels get enlarged. They are much bigger than the regular, this thing. Oh, I went far ahead. Let me go back. Go back. See, this is the vessel in the loop by means of a ball probe, and then you can quickly apply your this thing. See this? Clips. You can apply your clips easily, and this is how, once the vessel is clipped, you can divide it, and this part of the tumor is practically devascularized. So you can apply your clip, see, 2 clips at least to stay on the safer side, and then see these 2 clips, the vessel has been clipped, and then you can divide the tumor over here along with the vessel. Once you divide this, your tumor is segregated. See, this part of the tumor is segregated from this part of the tumor, which you can remove after the medial part of the tumor has been removed, and this is practically devascularized. So these are the cases you always do without embolization. Always without embolization. Turbinates are preferentially, invaded by the tumor very often. The middle and the inferior turbinate you can remove. I can remove the turbinate. Quickly, I'm going behind. This sort of sinusotomy is done above to see any tumor going up into the paranasal sinuses. This tumor is preferentially it invades the sphenoid sinus through the floor, go through the sphenoid sinus to the floor of the sphenoid sinus. This is the sphenoid sinus. I am floor being exposed, and then this entire tumor which is exposed, you can divide at the medial end of the maxilla. See this tumor segmentalization quickly, without wasting time. This is the medial part across the nasal septum. Sometimes from here, the medial side, it acquires the vascularity from the opposite sphenopalatine system. This is through the septotomy behind, going to the opposite side. This is the opposite side in the nasopharynx, and see how the tumor is. It is free. It is not attached anywhere except the roof of the nasopharynx, where you need to separate from the periosteal plane. This is how you segregate from all around, and then see this. This is segmentalization by means of coblation. This is pure segmentalization of the tumor. You remove this part of the tumor and deliver to the nasopharynx by means of finally dividing at the level of the nasopharyngeal roof. And this is how this tumor is being delivered intraoral. Now, the most important part of the tumor, this particular tumor had an invasion in the pterygoid process, which I really want to show to everyone to prevent recurrence. This is one of the major ways to prevent recurrences. See this. This is the tumor occupied in the entire pterygoid process. Entire pterygoid is full of tumor, and this part of the tumor, this pterygoid bone, this tumor has the ability to infiltrate the marrow part of the pterygoid bone. It invades the Haversian system of the pterygoid bone, and how simply you can remove it. See this. Let me show this. Let me show this. It is going to come. Yeah, this is all pterygoid bone. Now, pick up this tumor. You have to pull it gently. This is the crux behind. Expose the complete. This is the remnant of the pterygoid process being exposed. This is something I really want to emphasize. Once you remove the pterygoid, let me show. I'm quickly going ahead because of the time. I don't want to cross the limit. And this is how. This is the tumor. This entire tumor. This is the maxillary sinus. This part we have removed, and this is the infratemporal fossa behind. And this pterygoid tumor has to go. let me show how to lift up. See, this tumor has to be lifted. See this tumor being lifted off the pterygoid bone. See how this tumor infiltrates the Haversian system of the bone. That is the crux. You need to remove it. Gently, gently pull it. Don't break it. Don't break it. Don't pull all the way in one go. Quickly. See this? This is the marrow bone of the pterygoid. This is how you can pull it from the pterygoid. This is the sphenoid base. And actually you can remove the entire tumor in one go. By multiple goes, not in one go. One go means the entire tumor in toto, but in multiple attempts. Quickly, gently pull it and look at the openings in the bone. Never ever try to pack here this bleeding with anything with the gauze. In any micro tumor left behind would be pushed inside the opening if you try to control the bleeding here by means of packing. Never ever pack anything. Let the blood come out. Let the blood come out for a while. It will stop automatically once the tumor is out. Pterygoid itself never bleeds. It is the tumor which bleeds. So always gently, keep removing gently. Any given extension of the tumor can be removed endoscopically, provided it is segmentalized under vision. Gently pull it from wherever it is going to the orbit, to the cavernous sinus, to the intracranial space, parapharyngeal space, orbital fissures, anywhere. See this tumor being gently pulled off the pterygoid. And never ever pack it at this point of time to remove the tumor completely. And once it is removed, later on, drill away this entire pterygoid bone. Many times we drill the pterygoid to the level that it doesn't exist at all. This is how one can easily, under vision, remove this tumor, and this cannot be achieved with this much of illumination and magnification by any open approach. And this is the major reason why we consider that the endoscopic approach is the approach of choice to deal with such tumors. This is what the message I wanted to give here. It is not because of the, see now finally the bone, the drill, the high-speed drill being used to drill away this entire pterygoid process completely, to remove every small microscopic part of the tumor extending to this bone. And this is the major cause to the so-called recurrence. This is the major cause, and in the open approach, it cannot be, I would say it is not possible to remove this tumor with this much of efficiency, illumination and visualization. And this kind of the drilling is not possible in that approach to ensure that your tumor has been completely removed. And that is how such tumors can be dealt with. Thank you so much for your, attention. I'm sure I have not exceeded the time. Thank you, Dr. Ashok Rokade, once again for this opportunity. And if anybody has any questions or anything, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Dr. Jain. That was excellent, very detailed explanation about how you assess these tumors, how you investigate, and surgical planning is the key. And the take-home message is, rather than going straight for the tumor, is to surround the tumor and then go for the kill.
Question on the Q&A chat room asking if you would consider using the microdebrider on for JNA resection.
Microdebrider is a fast-cutting tool. It has its own application indication. But JNA, we refrain to use microdebrider for its inability to control the bleeding. Why we use the coagulator? For its ability to control the bleeding, for its ability of coagulation, for its ability for cutting, at the same time irrigation and the suction. Yes, in one situation we have done one case when we started using onyx. We used for a smaller tumor, the entire tumor turned black. Once the entire microvasculature of the tumor was injected with the onyx, and we literally remove the tumor with a microdebrider with hardly any bleeding. So that is a different situation, but otherwise microdebrider is not a preferred tool for the tumor itself. For exposure, you saw me using microdebrider for other regions, and that is different. But tumor, microdebrider is not a preferential tool.
Thank you. No further questions from the chat lines.
We just a poll about how many of the delegates embolize the tumors. So I'm just sharing the results. I think around 60% of them said they do embolize the tumor, and around 30% is good. But at least 70% of them actually performing the surgery. So that's quite an impressive number of the delegates present.
See, I tell you why people are embolizing, only for one reason, the fear of bleeding. That's why I mentioned we need to critically analyze what actually we are getting out of embolization. If I have a tumor with exclusive blood supply coming from the internal maxillary, why would I, spend my time, energy, and money for the embolization? I would go intraoperatively, first catch the vessel and get through without embolization. Thus, we have done in our hundreds of cases. We have a long series of more than 400 cases now, out of which majority have been done without embolization. Embolization we do with certain indications, but not, irrespective of the extension and other indications.
Ashok, you and I are based in the UK, and I see Louise also on the panelist list. I think it would be very difficult for us as ENT surgeons in the UK to justify not discussing preoperative angiography and embolization, with the patient, with the parents, and offer that as a standard of care. So I appreciate that in other centers, in other practices, embolization is not necessarily optional, but it's preference of the surgical team. But I think in the UK overall, given that the numbers are significantly lower, I think you would agree that not even thinking or discussing embolization is a significant clinical issue that can quite easily and quite quickly go into medical legal.
Yes, that can be one of the issues. We should give all the options to the patient. I agree with you.
Yeah.
With all pros and cons of surgery with or without embolization, pros and cons of embolization itself, because embolization, as I mentioned, is not free of complications. Right. So yes, you're right. We have to give all the options to the patient to choose for.
And I totally agree, Satish. So in our workup of all our patients, and certainly we do not have over 400, but certainly in our workup of all these patients, the patient and the family, if they are a child, will have a separate consultation with the interventional radiologist to go through the procedure and expected complications. So they do tend to see quite a few people before they come back to the surgical team with a decision. And certainly the last 10 JNAs that we've done in Liverpool over the past 3 years, none of them have said no embolization. But I suspect that's how we have kind of steered the parents and the patients.
Yes. And, as I mentioned about the Onyx, Onyx is a wonderful, very, very safe embolization material. If your insurance permit, if the patient, financially permits, there's no doubt that the Onyx makes a difference. Onyx is simply amazing. It definitely drastically reduces the bleeding. The cost is a limiting factor. For one vial costing $1,000, how many vials needed? Maybe, and one of the patients, we needed 12 vials, $12,000 for the embolization. Is a huge price, and that's why I said this is one of the biggest limiting factor, particularly in developing country like us. I don't know how the insurance is working there in your country to give Onyx. I don't know exactly. You know better, but this is something important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you once again, Dr. Ashok Rokade, for everything, for giving this opportunity. Thank you all.
Yeah, it was a pleasure having you.